All right, it says we are now streaming on YouTube. So I want to just welcome everyone today. I want to make sure that, all right, it says I take care of all of this technology stuff in the background. Yeah. So this is not my expertise, but I appreciate your patience today. I just want to welcome, first of all, our guests as they start to show up and engage with us in the session today. I'm super excited. We had over 100 people register for this event today, 112 to be exact, and that's not counting the folks that I sent the YouTube live link to this morning. So I hope that we get a good representation of folks that attend and engage with us today. If you hear any background noise going on out of the entire week, this is the day that the lawn care people at 11:30 decide to show up at my house. And Kirsten, I think you said you're in the middle of a storm. So we're just gonna go with the flow today. And I hope that you're still going to take away some valuable information. If you are joining with us today, I hope that you'll take a moment to say hello. You can simply click in the chat area to add any comments, ask your questions if you have questions that you would like to ask the panel. And also to just let us know that you're there. We would greatly appreciate it. And I do want to say thank you to our panelists today. And I'm going to give you a moment here to introduce yourself so that everyone participating with us knows each one of us. I'll start with myself and then we'll just go from there, okay? So my name is Valerie Plis. I am a Gallup certified strengths and executive coach. And I'm also an organizational development consultant with over 30 years experience in learning and development. And I'm super excited to be here today. Kirsten, how about we pass it on to you next?
Thanks, Valerie. So I'm Kirsten Beske. I am a former attorney turned clinical psychotherapist, and I have a business where I work with companies in inserting positive psychology into company cultures. And I'm also a coach, and I work with professionals and entrepreneurs on their mindset. So when they want to upscale themselves and their lives and their business, they work with me.
Awesome. Thank you for being here today, Kirsten. Ife, what about you?
Good afternoon. My name is Ife Bell. I am the Chief Strategy Officer of To Be Consulting. We are an organizational development and leadership company, and with more than, together as a team, we have more than 10 to 15 years of experience working in leadership development and community engagement. And so I am just all over the moon today to be here with you guys.
We're glad to have you too. All right, Kathy, what about you?
My name is Kathy Forte. I've worked in the field of developmental disabilities for over 21 years. I know Ife. We currently spend a little bit of time together, and so she invited me to join this panel. That's pretty much it. I mean, I'm a church goer, you know, work on the usher board, drive the church van. I'm a mom, you know, treasurer, secretary for the PTA, you know, just mom stuff, family stuff, and was asked to join the panel, and I'm really blessed and glad to be here.
We're glad to have you, Kathy. Thank you. All right, Jesiah, what about you?
Hey guys, good afternoon. My name is Jesiah Brock. I'm the Executive Director of the Impact Centers for the YMCA of Greater Cincinnati. I've been working for the Y for probably about 16 years, and I've been heavily involved in community development and leadership development for probably about 10 years.
Great. Awesome. We've got a variety of experience and expertise on the call today. And of course, the topic is around anti-racism and leadership. And so if you are a leader on this, participating in this session today, I hope that my prayer is that you walk away with some confidence and some tools to help you really engage in some meaningful conversation. this whole event today started after watching the situation with George Floyd that was on the news 24/7. It was heart-wrenching to watch it. There were several other events leading up to George Floyd's death, and even afterwards, that really shook me to the core. And even thinking about in my own hometown, it was 5 years ago that Samuel DuBose, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, was killed for minor traffic issues. And so I hate that it took this to wake me up personally, but I'm glad it did, and I hope it is a wake-up call for many others. So today, the purpose of this session is to really just create a space for us to just talk for a little bit, and to also talk about leadership. To me, if I could define leadership in one word, it's all about influence. Whether you have a title of being a leader or you don't have that title, you still have leadership, you still have influence. And every single one of us on this call today, if we take away something meaningful, some action that we can put in, some steps that we can put into action, we will be exercising leadership. And that's my challenge to everyone who listens. It is time for us as leaders in organizations, in our communities, leaders in our families, we must step up and demand change. And so let's move on. Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready. Okay, so I want to jump in here. First of all, I think that there are two very important things that need to be in place, right? Before we can have a conversation like this. So if you're a leader and you have a team, or you just want to have these discussions or have a discussion with your family or with friends, I think that there are two things that are critical, okay? Here's the first learning opportunity. Two things that are very critical to have a safe and productive discussion around a topic that is emotionally charging again, is very emotional. And I think the first one really is about mindset. And Kirsten, this speaks to your expertise. Can you tell us what is important about a growth mindset, and how is that necessary for the discussion that we're going to have today?
Sure. And so for folks who aren't familiar with even the word mindset, because not everyone is, mindset is really the set of beliefs and the way of thinking we have that informs our behaviors, our outlook, and our attitude towards things in the world. It's like the lens through which we view the world. And so there's basically two kinds of mindset that the researcher Carol Dweck identified. One is a fixed mindset and one is a growth mindset. And so the fixed mindset is when you either think I already know it or I can't know it. The growth mindset, which we are suggesting is the best one to bring to this type of a discussion, is the one that is, I don't know it yet, I can learn it. And really giving yourself grace to make mistakes, because there is no learning without stumbling and falling from time to time. So in order to have these productive discussions, we really have to give ourselves that, again, I said the grace to screw up, but to engage, and not give ourselves kind of an out that, oh, if I do this, I will insult someone, I'll look like an idiot. None of that. Just getting yourself in the framework that I am learning and I can grow from this, and it will benefit me, it will benefit my team, and it will be the best way to jump into this difficult discussion. So we just want everyone to keep in mind. Oh, and there is a resource out there that a colleague of mine published. It's called The Person You Mean to Be by Dolly Chug. It's just one of many amazing resources out there, but it really applies growth mindset to this whole discussion about bias. So Just thought I'd throw that out there as a
Yeah.
resource.
Oh, I love it. A growth mindset, right? I don't know it, but I want to know it. I want to learn it. And so I love that. I think for me, based on my experience working with leaders in organizations across the country, and also being trained around crucial conversations, Joseph Grenny, who's the author of Crucial Conversations, he said, when you are in a highly charged conversation, if the environment is not safe, one of two things will happen. People will revert to silence. So in other words, they will shut down, they will disconnect, they will disengage, I'm done, right? They check out, or number two, they revert to violence. Silence or violence. If you're trying to have a conversation and you're monitoring what's happening in the team and you see people shutting down or you see people reverting to violence, you automatic right there is a red flag. This is still not safe enough, right? And so I think personally, this is why social media is not the place to have these kinds of conversations, because that environment is anything but safe. And Kirsten, speaking to your expertise, too much fixed mindset. Okay, I'll leave it right there. All right. So let me ask the rest of you, Ife, Jesiah, Kathy, just jump in there. What do you think are what are the most important factors for creating a safe space, not just for our conversation today, but for leaders who want to step up and have these conversations within their teams? What's important, do you think?
We all looked at each other like, who's first?
Who wants to dive in?
Who wants to dive in?
Yeah.
I think it's very important to, we talked about mindset and we talked about safety, but the most important thing that leaders need to remember at this time is that they've built good relationships with people to create that space where people feel comfortable talking. And if that hasn't been built up or has not been developed, you're going to have to give that a little bit of time to grow there. I think that accepting people's offerings is going to be important. I mean, everybody believes what they believe or feels how they feel. And when they express that, thanking them for that offering, like thanking them for saying what they feel or what they think or where they are in a certain space, just to allow safety to develop and grow. Like, I think that's one of the most important things when we get to talking about these conversations, in short.
Yeah, just pulling on that thread a little further, I think, I always say you go into dangerous places, scary places with curiosity and grace, right? Unless it's a haunted house, like that's the only place you can go with it. But, really when we think about leadership, right, and we think about courageous conversations and we think about having these conversations about race and anti-racism, right, you have to come in, or any challenging or charged topic, right, coming in and leading with curiosity and grace. It's like your safety suit, right? Like you can go into the room with that curiosity and with some grace that you're extending to others, and with the hope that others will extend it to you, to learn, right? Not to say that I know all the answers, or even if I think something is right, the curiosity that perhaps something new could be right. And that there could be some new piece of information. So I always say curiosity and grace are the armors, so to speak, or those coat jackets you need, or almost a scarf, right? I love scarves, right? So almost a scarf that you need as a leader to wear when you go into these conversations.
I would probably say there are two things that are necessary. The very first thing is trust. You have to have trust. And that's tough, to be totally honest. And I'll get back on that piece in a minute. The second thing that I think you have to have is you have to have a willingness to be uncomfortable. You have to have a willingness to be wrong. You have to have a willingness to have your worldview challenged. And I'm gonna back up something you said earlier. As frustrated as I am about people like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, The very first Africans that were recorded to come to this country, it was in 1619 in August. 1619. So part of my frustration is that it's why is it now that people are able to say, oh, well, we have a problem, something's wrong. So how often have people attempted to have conversations, but there's been no trust? Or how long have we attempted to have conversations where individuals didn't want to have their worldview challenged, so we couldn't have a conversation? I touched this. I'll wrap this my point by saying this, and I know some people wouldn't believe this. I don't find many spaces, and Ife knows I said the same thing earlier in another talk. I personally don't find many spaces that I find safe for those exact reasons. Are you willing to receive the information that I give you? So if you can't receive it, then we can't have a conversation. Nothing else to talk about. This internet space is not safe for me, and so then we can't learn from each other. And so I think that those things have to be addressed first before we can have an open dialogue, so we both can grow. And I think there's a lot of work for us to do here in America and in this world.
Totally agree. It's hard to have a conversation with someone, Kirsten, speaking to what you mentioned, who has a fixed mindset, right? Who already knows it. To me, that's like charging an uphill battle. You're just, I don't know how you win those wars. I think it's crucial. Kathy, you talked about relationships. Jesiah, you talked about trust. I think those are very critical components, and the curiosity component necessary for us to come together and be open-minded, willing to learn, wanting to know more, striving to understand, and just being open to learning, right? So I think that's, as leaders, before we ever attempt to have a conversation or engage in a conversation around this, we need to sit back and do some self-reflection of our own, right? Mm-hmm. And ask ourselves some of these things that you've already talked about. What kind of mindset have I adopted around this issue? Are the folks that I want to have this conversation with, do I have an existing relationship with them already? And if I don't, right, Kathy, what's behind that? And what do I need to create a relationship with them so that there is trust? We can speak to each other in an honest way, right? And Ife adopting that mindset of curiosity. The first time the five of us got together, it was like, I just wanted to keep talking. In fact, I said, can we do this again and again and again, right? Because I loved the dialogue. I loved what you had to say. I was learning. I felt like this was an opportunity for me to become a better person. And as leaders, that's just not that title. That's not the destination, right? This is a journey, and it's a lifelong journey. And so thank you for just speaking into that and sharing that.
And Valerie, I'll just add, the idea of being proactive in this regard is a key part of the growth mindset. So just challenging everyone out there to think of this as that journey that you spoke of, and that requires some proactive discussions and individual education and learning, and a desire to expand. So, we hope that people can bring that to the whole.
And I think sometimes we overcomplicate things, right? With words, we make it all fancy. And I love language, right? Language matters. Language is important, and all change is based in linguistics. But, in a simplified way, you just got to own your ish, like own your ish, whatever it is. Own it, right? It's like, let's just keep it simple. And that is if you don't own it, then how do you know something needs to be challenged, right? And if you can't articulate that I'm owning some of this, right? And I know it's not right, or it doesn't feel right, or it's something needs to change, then we don't know that you're really in a growth mindset, right? So being able to articulate that ownership of your ish, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. Okay. Okay, cool, wonderful.
Let me ask this question, if you don't mind. I'm jumping in, just thinking about like, how do we begin to start these conversations with the people we work with and the people that we're around? Is it just asking, how are you doing? How do you feel about it? We're as leaders, and I might have the answer to this, but I'm asking the panel, where do we begin that? How do we get that ball rolling to even bring a consciousness or awareness of what is happening, maybe not to your family, but to some people's families, or how do we do that? How do we start that?
Kathy, I was thinking the same thing. Thank you for jumping in there and asking that.
Yeah.
Who has a idea coming to mind? Jesiah, you look like you have something you want to say.
No, I can't. I don't want to jump in front of anybody at all. You know, I think it depends on the environment and what your objective is. So there is some internal work that can be done, and then there's institutional work that can be done. There's community work that can be done, and there's personal work that can be done. Depending on which area, you would approach it a little differently. So if you're wanting to tackle systemic racism in a corporate environment, then your approach is one way. If it's, hey, my neighbor, and I'd really like to build that relationship, then your approach would be that way. So I think it really depends. So I guess you choose which answer do you want? Which one you want to tackle first?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you have to figure that out, right? Like through that self-reflection, right?
Yeah.
Where do I need to start, right? And you might go way down, or you might be in there for a little while in that self-reflection, right? Like, well, I don't know where I need to start, and so when you think about the workplace, that can be so broad, right? If you're a leader of leaders or a leader of others or a functional leader, right? You have multiple layers and people and relationships to consider. And so, thinking about where, not necessarily, it is where do you start, but it's also where do you not end, right? I know that sounds weird, like not end, like it should not end, right? So you shouldn't just start and end with your layer, right? So if you're a functional leader, just convening your leadership team and just working on it is not where it should start and end, right? As Valerie said, it's a journey, right? And so who else do I need to empower and equip for them to engage throughout those layers? And maybe it is the bravery place of just, I'm going to start with my neighbor. It's safe over here. I think I can start here, and I'm going to, as I say, build that leadership muscle, right? So that I can take it back into the workplace and have these conversations.
And Ife, if it's that neighbor because you have a relationship with them, right? To me, that's a no-brainer. When all of this started happening, I felt convicted. I had to speak up and do something. For me, it was all about starting the conversation in the lane in which I have some expertise around leadership. That's where, Kathy, I felt I wanted to start the conversation. Now, there are definitely other opportunities for me to now do that with family and with neighbors, although I really only know one of my neighbors. But anyway, to have those conversations, right? Because Jesiah, you're right, it's different depending on who you're having that conversation with. I guess the big challenge today for anyone who's listening is where could you start, right? Name it, write it down. Is it your neighbor? Is it someone at church? Is it someone that you work with? Is it a team member? Is it with your boss? Or if you're the leader, is it with your team? I think there's no shortage of people, right? Mm-hmm. There's an audience out there, and there's people who want to talk about this. We just have to be brave enough to take the initiative to initiate those conversations, right? I think for me, that's where I started. Kirsten, I don't know if you have any comments.
Well, I think bravery is, I think I'll just speak for myself. there's a fair amount of guilt, right? Because this as Jesiah said, been going on for 400 years, right? And all of a sudden we're here being, oh, jeez, we got to change this. And so you feel terrible. You're behind the curve. Why didn't I understand how bad this was? How could I possibly not have understood? And then you feel guilty and you shut down and you go into your little hiding place. And so that's what we're hoping that we don't do. So no matter where you are on your journey of figuring out why this is going on, whether you're at the level of, hey, I'm not a racist, so that's good, right? Or you're a level of, hey, there's systemic issues here that date back to 1619 that I didn't even really understand. Oh my gosh, there was a massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Why didn't I learn that in history, right? Like your brain wants to explode because there's all these things you were not actually aware of, and then you realize it's your own fault because you were thinking you knew and you didn't. And so then can you accept, okay, I didn't know this. It could be because of my white privilege. It could be because of I was lazy. It could be because of where I live. You can make up all kinds of excuses. Doesn't matter. Now you know that you didn't know, and now it's your job to start figuring it out without guilt and engage in the conversations. And that's where you are, right? You got to just start where you are and move forward. That's my thoughts.
Kirsten, that whole guilt thing, that has really, that's bothered me. My church, City Gate in Lebanon, had a series of discussions shortly after George Floyd's murder, and the pastors were talking to, because we're biracial, multiracial church, talking to various Black African American church members and brothers and sisters in the church. And so one of the ladies was talking about her son, and she kept talking about this checklist and that how she trained her son from an early age. There was this checklist. There was these series of things that it was important for her son to grow up and learn and follow, because if you get in trouble, here are things you must not do. And I sat there and all I could do was weep, thinking, a checklist? Is that really, were we really there? And I felt awful not knowing that was what the situation was and we were dealing with. That's a big challenge for me to overcome, honestly.
And we have, I think the next layer under that is that we have a checklist for work too. Right. So as a Black and African American leader in the workplace, there's a checklist of, if these things happen, these are the things you don't do, or to avoid these things happening, these are the things you need to do. Right. I can remember learning that at my very first job at Burger King. Right. So my parents went through that checklist with me. Before you go to work on the job at the age of 14 in a restaurant, these are the things you don't do. And it just carried over, right? And so it's gone with us. It's gone with me, right? And probably many Black and African American individuals could tell you about the training they received, not only in the, what do I do outside of work, but what do I do inside of work, right?
Yeah. If you're 100% correct, growing up, there's always, they call it the talk. And there have been many of them, especially me being a Black male. Automatically, a lot of times I'm viewed as threatening by just my presence in a room can be threatening. And so you're taught somehow to try to dial that back so you don't make people uncomfortable. So that is both a racial thing and a gender thing. That's a whole other conversation, being a Black male in certain spaces. But and then Ife's 100% correct. When you're working in corporate spaces, there's a whole nother set of lists of things that you have to do. And then you're lucky, you're blessed rather, if someone who's seasoned, who's made mistakes, can then pass that down to you. What if you're first generation? What if there's no one ahead of you to teach you these things? Now you're bumping up your head against the wall, and you're learning through reprisals and attacks, microaggressions, that your existence is threatening to people. And that's a third other kind of conversation, the type of attacks and things that you get by making people uncomfortable because you exist, because no one taught you those other one roles. But I do want to say this, and this is important because, and again, I know we're all believers here, so, and you know, I always go this way because it's who I am. The word of God says we're not ignorant of the devil's devices. One of the devil's devices that he utilizes is guilt and shame, especially when you make mistakes. He tries to guilt you and shame you to stop your forward progress. He wants to stop reconciliation. In a spirit moment this morning, I talked about the prodigal son. And one of the things that stopped the prodigal son from wanting to come back was the guilt and the shame of coming back home, to become one as one family where he belonged. And so I think sometimes where it's the guilt and the shame of some of our counterparts of our family and the human race that we have coming back, so that we can have those conversations and we can be better together. So if anyone's watching, if you're feeling guilty or you're feeling shameful, you know, one, ask the Lord for forgiveness if he's putting it on your heart to do so. And then the next conversation is, okay, what can we do together to get better together? Because there's another fight. There's equity with women. There's some issues there that we have to discuss. And there's some things as men that we need to talk about as well. So we all can, and there's many other fights. So don't let shame and guilt stop us from having the conversation. Let's ask for forgiveness. Let's heal each other, and let's get together and let's fix this thing.
I just want to share, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead, Kathy, please.
The importance of continuing to learn and being informed. You know, what I heard you say, Valerie, was that I didn't know. I didn't know. And you wouldn't know because it wasn't your experience. But the fact that people start conversations and they learn and they hear and they speak to each other about what their experiences are and what they may have been can create that space where people begin to grow and learn and then have an understanding. Because if you don't know, you just don't know. But then after you receive that knowledge, what do? You have to make sure you progress that thing forward. You continue to move forward. And like Jesiah was saying, not fester in what you might call guilt because you didn't know, but you don't know because it's not your experience. You don't know because you have not had to do that with your children, or your mother didn't have to do that with you. But once you are brought to that awareness, those are the things that are key. The awareness, and then moving forward in that awareness, acknowledging that and making sure we continue to build on that as leaders, as people, period.
And I was exactly going to build on that, Kathy. Thank you so much, because there is a thing called implicit bias, which means invisible bias that you don't even know you have. And I just want to offer out a tool to everyone. There is, it's called the Harvard Implicit Bias Tests, and they're specifically broken out by different categories, and it's free, it's online. You can go on there and take their implicit bias test, and you will be shocked. Or at least I've read other people's results, and I try to get good results, but we all have implicit bias. And if you take these tests and you realize how deeply ingrained the implicitness is, right? You don't even know is there invisible bias exists in all of us in different categories across the spectrum. This is not just black, white, brown, it's female, male, sexuality, like the whole spectrum. So just realizing that you may think that you don't have bias, and you might be surprised if you go check it out. And then you can take those steps Kathy was talking about.
Kirsten, I think I'm sure there are a lot of people that when they hear that word bias causes them heartburn right away, right? Because that's something they have to admit to, right? That there's, whether it's conscious or unconscious. Here's a different way of thinking about this, okay? That when Jesiah was talking about the difference in the lack of equity, right? But even between men and women, right? I believe, right? God has uniquely and wonderfully wired and designed each one of us with unique talents and strengths and gifts. And that's kind of my lane in leadership and organizational development, is around understanding talents and strengths. And maybe it was just the way I was wired, right? I'm an achiever, I'm activator, I'm highly competitive, I'm always doing things. If somebody told me something couldn't be done, I'm like, just sit back and watch, right? That just kind of like, that attitude just like reared up inside of me and said, "No, you don't think so? You haven't seen me try yet." So even like this, maybe I'm being way too vulnerable here in front of everybody, but that concept of there being a bias or a lack of equality between men and women, that did not even resonate with me. Because if there was somewhere I was headed, I just had this confidence in me that there was nothing that was going to get in my way of me getting there. So I say that because I think that there's everybody who didn't see that, right? Everybody who didn't understand the degree. It wasn't that they had any kind of ill feelings or you know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah, and it's not always a lack of desire, right? Like, it's not that I don't believe it's not a lack of confidence, it's not a lack of desire, it's not a lack of skills, it's not a lack of knowledge. There are systems at play and operating and have been operating for a long time, right? And new ones are being developed on top of the ones that currently exist, right? And so, it's even the ability to understand, it's like we're trying to build something we've never seen.
right.
And so if I don't know what the puzzle looks like, I'm not sure where to put my piece. I know my piece needs to be in the puzzle, but if I don't know what the picture is, how do I find out where my piece goes? I'm confident, I'm strong, I'm educated, I know, but I just need to know where my piece goes. And sometimes, not sometimes, right now, there are systems working to keep people from knowing where their piece goes and to keep people from putting their piece where it goes.
Okay.
So important to recognize that systemic piece, it's super important.
Now, see, I'm sitting here and I'm not sure. Egyptian 83, I appreciate your comment. That whole believing I could do anything is part of my white privilege.
I mean, the stats are there, right? That's why we say you got to dig in, understand, as Kirsten said, what are your bias and implicit bias? You've got to do the homework and understand what is the data telling us and has been telling us for a very long time, right? Some stats that we were talking about on another call, but also just in some other things that I'm doing. Less than 0.8% of African Americans hold a CEO position in a Fortune 500 company. Of all adult Black Americans in the US, right? Less than 8% hold a professional position, an executive or senior level position, right? And I think it's around 10%, something like that. I don't have it in front of me, of professional positions, right? Like, that is not because it's a lack of knowledge, skill, and capacity. Like, at this point, there's something else afoot, right? And we just have to look at, what are our leadership practices? Like, the first thing as a leader is, what are my leadership practices, right? As a leader, am I responsible for hiring? And how might my bias, my implicit bias, my unknown bias, the hidden bias, the bias under my shoe, whatever, be influencing that, right? How is my cultural upbringing influencing that, right? My own experiences, right? So, sometimes, as Jesiah said, dealing with the gender issue is another discussion. But when you talk about it, as a Black woman or as a Black man or as a whatever woman or man, like, you can't separate the two. And so sometimes they're fighting with one another, right? Like, do I rah-rah on the woman rah on the African American, like, I don't know, I'm conflicted, both need help and I don't know which one to push, right? And so, it's like, which fight can I be in? Which one am I going to be committed to? But doing that homework and understanding the data that's behind it. I'm going to wrap this up with this. Our company, we're a benefit corporation company. Social impact entrepreneurs is what they call them. And our piece is about how do we address workplace redlining. Like, we're all familiar for the most part with redlining and what that looked like in the housing and education and other places, but how do we really look at the impacts of workplace redlining tactics and strategies and how that's impacting everyone, right? Everyone, right? Without diverse voices, do we really accomplish our outcomes and our goals? Are we really hitting the target? And so, just how do we look at the information and then think about what does it mean for me and what can I do as a leader? What action can I take?
And I think, maybe you could speak to this. The worry I have, and I've heard expressed by some of my colleagues, is that we overburden the people of color, that when we have our questions, when we're not educating ourselves, and I'm posing this as a question, is it a risk that we look to people to educate us and put an undue burden on them in the workplace? I don't know. Any thoughts on that? Or is this one of those check boxes?
Yeah, I'll chime in, but definitely, it can happen, right? Like, I was curious about something and I didn't know where to start my learning, right? And so I hesitated in calling some people and saying, I just want to understand, what does this mean, or how does this impact you? And I said, I just want you to give me some context and some of your experience. So if you'll tell me your story so that I can go and do the homework, right? Because I didn't want to start in the wrong place. And I really had no idea in this particular topic what to even type in the Google search, right? Like, let's just not pretend that we all know exactly what to put in the Google search, right? So this helped me get to some key, words or topics. And so, but then you have to do your work, right? Because as I tell my children this all the time and have for a very long time, I'm not Google. You want to know something, you're going to need to look it up, do your homework, do your research, right? That's that commitment to wanting to know.
I was guilty of reading comments, so I didn't hear your whole question. Kirsten, I'm just gonna be honest. I was sitting over here reading, and it lost me a little bit. So I apologize. But I did want to speak to something, a comment here. How do we remove the whole race identification? If we remove this, then we are all equal. Shouldn't we all be equal anyway? And this is what we're talking about, right? Like, how do I remove my look? And when we hear people say, I don't see color. How can you not? Is that fair to say that you don't see that my skin is brown or yellow? Or do you know what I'm saying? Like, how do we, teaching our children to let go of their identity, I don't know how that solves the problem. I think that we look at, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just saying, I'm not sure I agree with that particular statement.
Again, I'm being 120% vulnerable right now in front of whoever's watching. I'm guilty of having said that.
Yep.
I said that on social media and somebody called me out and called me all kinds of names. And I said, you don't understand the intent behind that phrase.
Yeah.
It's that I didn't care that your skin was brown.
That's different from saying I don't see it. So like, so it's okay to say I see people for who they are, their personalities, their energy, what they're offering. But to say you don't see my color is different than saying I don't care about it. Those are two different things. And at least my personal assessment, I understand the intent behind it, but it being transparent and honest, it doesn't make me feel better. To hear someone say, I don't see your color, you know what I mean? Like, so when we hear people say that, I get the intent, but the reception from my end is like,
Right.
am I supposed to erase my look to
The message sent is different.
Right, right.
I get it.
Right.
I get it. Jesiah, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I think it really gets to this whole debate about equity versus equality. Equity versus equality. And what people need to understand is we act like it's equality that we want, when really equity is what we're trying to get to. Even the kingdom of God preaches equity. Kingdom of God does not preach equality. You know, the Bible talks very clearly about there are some that might need a little more attention than others. So here's the thing. Let's say God gives me the same exact thing that he gives you in order for both to be successful. That might be inadequate for me. I might need more, or you might need more. The concept of saying, pull yourself up by your bootstrap. Well, what if you don't have any bootstraps? And what are you supposed to pull up with? And we should be celebrating our diversity and instead of trying to make it all, trying to whitewash it and make it all the same. There's nothing wrong with this being different. Again, I'll go back to the body of Christ. If we're talking just about the church, even in church leadership, he says, and he gave some apostles and some prophets and some pastors and some teachers and some evangelists. Why would God need 5 different types of leaders to meet all the different needs? And all together they work to help the perfecting of the saints. Now, God, in all of his infinite wisdom and all his infinite knowledge, if it was just about equality and not about equity, he just would have gave one thing and everybody would have been exactly the same. But everybody isn't the same. And he made us different for a reason. That's the tapestry and the beauty of all that we are. Even God in himself, you know, it's God the Father, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, and the Son all together. So even that is that. So it's not about, it's this perception that, and I'll say this and I'll finish it up. I think sometimes when you look around in your environment and most people look like you and come from the same experience as you, you might not consider diversity. But when you are constantly faced with the fact that you're constantly in environments where people look and think differently than you, it's harder for you to avoid. You know, it's funny when you have some of my colleagues that might be white, when it's not until they come in places where everyone is different from them that they realize the fact that they're different. They don't even consider it. So that's a part of it as well, where you can escape it, where people, some cultures, you can't escape the fact that you're always reminded that you're different from the majority of people around you. So we are taught to embrace diversity in certain circles where other people are not taught to embrace it.
So here's my big takeaway, okay, for me personally, and maybe this is the way that myself and maybe others like me, instead of saying I don't see our differences, right? We need as leaders, in an effort to create everyone, to make sure everything is equal for everyone. I don't recognize our differences. What I should be doing as a leader is saying, listen, I understand that everyone sitting at this table has different experiences, different personalities, different talents, different strengths, different gifts. It's in our diversity that our teams are strong, not in our conformity or not in our similarities. What makes our teams strong and powerful are the fact, Jesiah, it's in our diversity, right? Maybe that's how we need to shape our thinking, instead of, I want to make this equal and for everyone. It's, hey, let's throw that out the window. Everything isn't equal for everyone because everybody at this table is unique and different.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. That's good. That's good.
Okay, obviously I'm one of those that need, right? I need to learn. Kathy, you were going to say something.
I just want to say what you said at the end there, acknowledging the differences is what's key. And that is the part you have to see and acknowledge people's differences, their experiences, you know, where they're from, where they've come from. Because when you don't, you're not acknowledging who they are. So the differences are important to acknowledge, but the equity, as Jesiah was saying, in that difference and what they add and what they bring, you know, adds the value and importance of their placement, their position, their team membership, or, you know, whatever that is. The fact that we are all different is what is key and important. My experience in my life could look different from Ife's and Josiah's, even though we are African American folks, professionals in the same kind of circle. But my experience, even professionally speaking, could look totally and completely different than theirs does. And being able to acknowledge that is what's key. We have to hold on to that. I want to say this to this person. I'm sorry. She is from, or he is from, another country, which creates a whole nother conversation, right? About how we, as Americans, view things because of what our experience is here. This person said, I didn't even have to put color or race on anything. We put it on everything. Driver's license. Oh, now they may not ask on an application, but they used to, right? So the where this person is coming from is a different perspective. And I just wanted to acknowledge and say that I appreciate that. But like where we from, everything is race and color and, you know, culture. So I just wanted to put that out. And
But
thank you.
Valerie, you're a strength builders coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so and if I apologize if I cut you off, my apologies to you. You're because if you were talking out, okay, I apologize. No, so Valerie, you're a professional and an expert at finding the different strengths in individual people. Your top 5 is a 5 or 3. Your top 5, your strength build 5, 10 of them. Wow. See, you say, well, I've been a while since I've done it. Your 10 might be different from my 10. You said that you're an activator, and I know my number 1 was input. So there's diversity even in that. Equality is saying you're going to treat me the same way that you would treat yourself, even though our strengths might be totally different.
Right.
As a coach in this area, you know that makes no sense.
That's absurd.
So and that's the thing. If that would be absurd, you know that you have to acknowledge my strengths and how I view the world so that we can make a stronger team. Why would it be any different in any other circle? We all have different things that we build. We don't want to run away from that, don't want to whitewash it. Let's find a way to embrace it and to celebrate these strengths so we make a stronger team together. And I think that, again, our approach in our American way is different. If you go to some places like in South America and in Brazil and everything like that, the approach is different there too. Because now you have Africans and you have the indigenous people and you have all these different classes, this caste system. Each culture has their own approach to diversity and inclusion. This one here is just an American approach. So to our friend that made the comment from another country, you have your own approach. It's not better or worse, it's just different. And so I think that we got to find ways to embrace our diversity, just like you would embrace diversity with your strength builders.
And, you know, to kind of, again, to piggyback on that, Jesiah, when I think about the research, and I'm speaking from my expertise, that Gallup has done around the uniqueness of everyone's natural talents and strengths, statistically, the chances of someone having, if we just look at your top 5 talents, right? That statistically, the chance of someone having your top 5 in any order is 1 in 275,000 chance. Okay? And it does matter what order, because your talents are measured by intensity. The chances of someone having your top 5 in that order is a 1 in 33.4 million chance. To put that into a visual image, the MetLife Stadium in New York is the largest NFL stadium across the country. It holds, the capacity is 82,500 people. That means we would have to find 405 MetLife stadiums filled to capacity before we find another Jesiah who's wired just like you, just like Kathy, just like Ife, just like me, right? So if we as leaders can learn to see the difference in color, acknowledge the differences, right? And embrace it, right? That's kind of the journey. I think ultimately we're where we're headed, is embrace the diversity. That's what makes our teams, our organizations powerful, right? Look for those opportunities to get to know your team members and their experiences and their background and their accomplishments, so that we can be more intentional about putting people in the right roles, right?
And looking at the underlying structures and just with a critical eye to whether there needs to be anything to change. So instead of being equal, it's equitable.
Right.
Yeah, I would add too, I know we're getting close to our time, but I would say, I think, there's some comments and some questions in there that we probably won't get to. They're great questions and comments, but I think just in even pulling on what you said is, do not despise small beginnings. We have to start somewhere, right? And if it's with 2 people, if it's with 10 people, if it's with 100, if it's a structural thing you can do, right? Where can you start, right? So you start small, dream big, and scale appropriately, because not fast is always appropriate.
I love that, right? We need to embrace small beginnings. That's how it's going to be, that organic grassroots effort, right? Yes, there are things that need to be happening in corporations and in America and in every country, right, to deal with the systemic issues. But there could be a grassroots effort, right, that starts from the ground and just begins to trickle up. And what would it look like if every single one of us started embracing those small steps, right, towards having this conversation with a coworker, with a neighbor, with a family member, with a peer, right, with a friend, and we all continue to strive to grow, right, and understand there's a difference between message sent, right, Kathy? Message sent and message understood. And I need to take ownership to that, right? And I need to step back and not get defensive, but I need to say, help me understand, right? So that the next time I can send the appropriate message, so that it's understood that while I don't care what color your skin is, I still value you and I still acknowledge, right? It's about sending the right messages. Okay, I got to stop. I could keep going and going. Listen, I appreciate every single one of you for joining with me today and being and extending grace to me and all of my lack of knowledge and understanding. And so 2 things. Ife, let's start with you. If someone wants to get some additional resources around how to have these conversations with their teams, what are you providing? And how can they?
So they can connect with us. Our company is at the poise to support teams and organizations and having these courageous conversations and looking at how they do some of that work. We have some information posted on our different social media, so they can go. I'll post it in the comments, but they can check us out on our website. But they can also access the document that we've created, just as some follow-up questions and some introspective questions on our link tree. For our tobeconsulting.net. So we are here to serve.
Awesome. Thank you for making that available. Definitely put that in chat, so everyone that's participating with us today and who might watch it in the future can engage in those resources. Kirsten, what about you?
Well, I know I mentioned a couple of resources during our talk today, so I'm happy to provide those resources plus a few more that I have to anyone who wants them. I'll put my email in the chat, and if people need to get in touch with me, they can shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to share what I have. And obviously, if there's anyone who wants to do more of the inner work around this, I'm available for consultation on that too, because a lot of this is inner work and it's hard.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, panelists, I want to hear your parting words. If there's one thing that maybe we've talked about, maybe we didn't, parting words, one thing that leaders can do, maybe it's that baby step. What's the one thing leaders could take action on today that could help advance these conversations and our cause.
I can go first. I feel like I've been talking way too much, so I'd rather somebody else go first. But I'll jump on in there. And Kristen kind of already provided this information. She talked about the implicit bias test, and I think that Harvard provides that. I think that's an excellent tool for everyone to take. I believe Oprah took the test, and I think she was surprised by her bias. Some of the things that she learned about herself that frustrated her a little bit, but she was able to learn about herself until she knew where she needed to start. And I think everybody has some bias towards something, including me. Everyone does. And so I think, starting that journey of learning yourself and where you are and how you can be a better version of yourself is probably the best advice that I could give.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesiah.
Quickly, my piece is this. When we consider what someone else's shoes feel like, it might help us realize that everything might not be pretty. Just taking time to put ourselves in other people's shoes. The word is empathy, not sympathy, but empathy. So using a little bit of empathy throughout our days, through our conversations, through our interactions, just taking a moment to step back and think about, what if it was me? What if it was my son? What if it was my daughter, my father, my sister? So just taking a step back and viewing spaces and experiences from there. That's my piece.
I love it. Thank you, Kathy.
Oh, I gave mine, but I'll give another one. I can say it again for the people in the back. Do not despise small beginnings, right?
Yeah.
Lead with grace, go with curiosity, extend grace, and do the work, right? And make the commitment to do the work. And that's for everyone, right? Everybody's got work to do. We're all a work in progress.
I love it. Kirsten, any final words from you?
Well, I think what everyone said, add in a little dose of self-compassion for where you are now, and give yourself that courage to keep moving forward. And I just, I feel like I just want to emphasize there is a systemic level to all of this that is your duty to educate yourself on. And I'm guilty of not having done that. I've learned so much, and it's layers deep. It's hundreds of years old, and there's always more to learn. So keep on learning.
Awesome. All right. Kirsten, Ife, Jesiah, Kathy, thank you for participating today. Thank you to all of our guests that engaged with us today as well. And those who will probably watch the video link at a later time. Thank you. And I really appreciate our opportunity to talk about this today.
Thank you.